From the moment she woke up each morning, the world around her existed mostly as sound. The first thing she heard was the soft clutter of dishes in the kitchen, the low hum of a ceiling fan, and the distant chatter from outside. She always took a slow breath before sitting up, letting her hands trace the edge of her blanket until her feet touched the floor. Life for her had always been this way, shaped by sound, shaped by touch, shaped by a kind of patience that most people never needed to learn. She moved through the small living space with calm steps, counting each one from memory. Her fingers brushed the wall as she walked, not because she doubted the path, but because it made her feel connected to the place she knew so well. The morning air always carried the distant noise of traffic and the occasional bird call, and somehow she felt comfort in how familiar everything was. She had been blind since early childhood. She didn't remember a world of color or light, only a world of voices, motions, and vibrations. Some days were harder than others, but most days she felt a quiet strength inside her. A strength she didn't show off or talk about. She didn't need to. It simply lived in her. Her favorite part of the morning was when she sat in front of the old keyboard placed near the window. The instrument wasn't special in any way. It was scratched along the edges and sometimes made a soft buzzing sound when certain keys were pressed. Someone had donated it years ago, and even though it wasn't perfect, she felt grateful for every note it could still produce. She sat down, straightened her back, and placed her fingertips lightly on the keys. The moment her hands touched them, she felt her heartbeat slow and the noise from the outside fade. She began to play a soft tune she had made up long ago. It wasn't anything complicated, just a slow flow of notes that made her feel safe. Every morning she played, not because someone told her to, but because music felt like a space she could truly understand. The world might be full of things she couldn't see, but sound was something she could shape, control, and fill with emotion. The gentle melody drifted across the room, and her family always paused to listen, even if only for a few seconds. They never told her how much they admired her talent, but the silence that fell whenever she played said enough. She had never taken proper lessons. Her family couldn't afford that kind of training, and even if they could, there were few teachers who knew how to teach a blind student. So she learned everything by touch. Every time she heard a piano piece, she tried to memorize it by listening carefully. She let each sound settle into her mind before slowly finding the matching key on her old keyboard. Despite the challenges, she practiced every single day. Hours slipped by without her noticing. Her fingers moved with gentle confidence, and even when she made mistakes, she simply tried again. She had learned long ago that mistakes were just part of the journey, not something to fear. There was something pure about the way she played. She didn't think about impressing anyone. She didn't think about reaching some big stage or becoming a star. She played because it made her feel alive, and that was enough. One afternoon, while she sat on the small couch in her living room, she overheard her family talking quietly. They didn't realize she could hear them so clearly, but every conversation in the house reached her easily. They mentioned a new event coming to the city, a music workshop led by a world-famous pianist. His name appeared often in newspapers and television shows. People talked about him with admiration, calling him a genius, a legend, a man who could create magic with his hands. She listened closely as her family described the event. There would be a gathering, a demonstration, a small question and answer session. It was open to the public, and people from all over the city would attend. She felt a spark of excitement, even though she tried to hide it. She had never heard a grand piano in person before. She had only felt the shape of her own worn-out keyboard. She wondered what a real piano might sound like, how heavy the keys would feel, how deep the notes might resonate. For a brief moment, she imagined sitting in the audience, listening to the famous pianist play. She imagined the rich sound filling the entire hall, a sound so powerful she could feel it in her chest. She imagined learning something new from just being there. Her feelings swirled gently in her heart, a blend of hope and curiosity. Our family spoke softly, debating whether they should take her or not. The event was crowded, and navigating crowds with her was always difficult. They worried she might get uncomfortable or lost. They worried that it might be too much trouble to manage the space and the people. but they also knew how much music meant to her. She didn't interrupt their talk. She waited until later when one of them approached her and asked if she wanted to go. She nodded immediately, a smile spreading across her face. She didn't need to see their expressions to feel their relief. They wanted her happiness. They were just afraid of making things difficult for her. The days leading up to the event felt strangely long. Every evening she sat at her keyboard and practiced the same simple melodies she always played, but her mind drifted to the upcoming workshop. She tried to imagine the sounds she would hear, the atmosphere in the hall, the excitement from the crowd. On the morning of the event, she dressed slowly, choosing clothes based on texture rather than color. She wanted to look neat, even though she knew appearances didn't matter much in her world. What mattered was how she felt, and she felt hopeful. Her family guided her outside carefully, making sure she didn't trip on uneven pavement or bump into anything unfamiliar. The ride to the venue was filled with quiet anticipation. She pressed her fingers lightly against the car door, feeling the vibrations as they moved. Her heart beat a little faster with each passing minute. When they reached the hall, she stepped out cautiously, holding onto a familiar hand. The noise of the crowd hit her immediately. People chatting loudly, footsteps echoing, chairs moving. It was overwhelming, but she held her breath and stayed calm. She focused on the voices, the movements, the overall rhythm of the crowd. Her family guided her to a seat near the middle of the hall. She sat down carefully, folding her hands in her lap. She felt the air shift as more people entered, filling the room. The energy in the space grew, a mix of excitement and admiration directed toward the famous pianist who would soon appear. When he finally walked onto the stage, the room erupted in applause. She couldn't see him, but she could hear the pride in his footsteps, the confidence in the way he approached the piano. He greeted the crowd with a strong voice, filled with the kind of charm people expected from someone of his reputation. She listened closely as he talked about his career, his struggles, his achievements. His voice carried a tone of someone who had lived in the spotlight for a long time. He sounded sure of himself, maybe too sure, she thought quietly. When the audience began asking questions, she felt a gentle push on her arm. Her family whispered that she should ask something if she wanted. After a moment of hesitation, she stood up slowly. Her voice shook slightly as she spoke, asking if she could touch the piano for just a moment after the session. The room fell unusually quiet. She waited, hopeful, her heart pounding. But the reply she received wasn't gentle. The pianist dismissed her request with a sharp tone, suggesting she was only trying to bring attention to herself. He said it in a way that made the audience shift uncomfortably. His words hit her hard, like cold air against warm skin. She stood silently, unsure of how to respond. She wasn't angry, just hurt. She slowly sat back down, feeling the weight of the moment settle in her chest. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She simply lowered her head slightly and allowed the noise of the room to wash over her again. The world had disappointed her before, and she had learned how to absorb the pain quietly. She didn't know it yet, but this painful moment would soon open a door she never expected. One that would change everything, not only for her but for everyone present in that hall. The hall was still buzzing with mixed reactions long after the famous pianist dismissed her request. People whispered to one another, some feeling uncomfortable with the way she had been spoken to, others simply moving on with the excitement of the event. But she sat quietly in her chair, hands folded together, trying to steady the shaking inside her chest. Her family leaned closer, asking softly if she wanted to leave, but she shook her head. She didn't want to leave with that painful moment being the last thing she felt. She wanted at least to hear the music she had come for, even if she couldn't touch the piano as she'd hoped. The pianist continued talking on stage, acting as though nothing unusual had happened. He shared stories about traveling across countries, performing for large audiences, and receiving awards. The crowd responded with admiration, clapping at all the right moments. But there was a slight change in the energy, a subtle shift, as if something had disturbed the smooth flow of excitement. She sensed it too. Even though she couldn't see the expressions around her, she could feel the tension. Small pauses in conversations, heavier breaths, and the silent sympathy from a few people seated nearby. She didn't dwell on it. She had learned to move past uncomfortable moments, even when they cut deep. As the event continued, a kind voice whispered from behind her, belonging to one of the staff members working at the hall. The person gently asked if she was all right. She nodded softly, not wanting to draw any more attention. The staff member hesitated for a moment, then quietly told her something that would stay with her for the rest of her life. "Wait here after the session. Don't leave early," the staff member whispered. "I'll come find you." Those words felt like a small spark of hope in the middle of the disappointment. She didn't know what the staff member planned, but she nodded in gratitude. Her heart lifted just enough to keep her calm. The crowd soon grew louder as the famous pianist moved to the grand piano. She sat straighter, listening closely. When the first notes rang through the hall, her heart trembled. It was the first time she'd ever heard a real grand piano in person. The sound was fuller, deeper, richer than anything her old keyboard could ever produce. The vibrations carried through the floor, up her legs, and into her chest. She felt every part of it. The pianist played beautifully, that much she couldn't deny. Even though his words earlier had hurt her, his skill was undeniable. She let herself get lost in the sound, allowing the melody to erase some of the heaviness inside her. Her family glanced at her quietly, relieved to see her enjoying at least part of the event. They knew how deeply she loved music, and they hoped the performance would soothe her heart. When the concert portion ended, the hall erupted in applause once again. People stood, applauding loudly, praising the pianist for his talent. He bowed confidently, basking in the admiration. As the session wrapped up, the audience began to gather their belongings. Some moved toward the exit, while others lingered for photos or one last look at the stage. She remained seated, just as the staff member had told her. Her family noticed her stillness and asked if she wanted to leave, but she simply shook her head. A few minutes later, someone gently touched her shoulder. She recognized the voice immediately. It was the staff member again. They asked her and her family to follow them backstage. Her heart beat faster, both with excitement and uncertainty. They walked carefully, guided through narrow paths and around people packing up equipment. She could hear footsteps, distant conversations, and the soft shuffling of instruments being stored away. The backstage area felt completely different from the audience section. There was more movement, more direction, and a sense of purpose in every sound. The staff member led them to a quiet corner near the edge of the stage, far from the busy crew. She was told to wait there for a moment. Her fingers tightened slightly around her family member's hand. She wasn't scared, just anxious about what might happen next. Minutes passed, and soon the staff member returned with a small smile. "It's clear now," they said softly. "You can come." She didn't fully understand what that meant until they placed her hand on a smooth, cool surface. Her breath caught in her chest. The texture, the width, the faint warmth from the lights above. She realized instantly what she was touching. It was the grand piano. Her knees felt weak from surprise. She had dreamed of touching a real piano for years, imagining what it would feel like, how heavy the keys might be, how the polished edges would feel under her palms. And now, after everything that had happened, she finally stood before one. The staff member spoke in a gentle tone, explaining that the crowd had mostly left and the stage was clear. They had asked the remaining crew to give her a little time. It wasn't part of any official plan, but a quiet kindness they wanted to offer after seeing what she had gone through. She lowered herself onto the piano bench slowly, guided by her family. Her hands trembled slightly as she touched the keys. They felt different from her keyboard at home. These keys were smoother, heavier, and carried a certain presence she could feel even before pressing them. She took a long breath. For a moment, she didn't play. She just ran her fingers across the keys gently, feeling every detail, every corner. She had always imagined this moment, but now that it was real, she wanted to take it slowly. When she finally pressed the first note, her heart nearly stopped. The sound rang out in a rich, warm tone that filled the empty hall. It echoed softly around her, surrounding her like a gentle embrace. She played another note, then another, and each one carried a different kind of beauty. Her family watched silently, moved by the sight of her experiencing something she had long dreamed of. The staff member stepped back, giving her space, allowing her to take in the moment without interruption. Without realizing it, she started playing the soft melody she practiced every morning. Her fingers moved naturally, guided by memory and emotion. The simple tune somehow sounded fuller, deeper, carried by the power of the grand piano. Little did she know that a few people were still in the hall, cleaners, technicians, and the event organizer. They had paused their work, drawn by the unexpected sound. At first, they listened quietly, unsure where the music was coming from. But when they saw her sitting at the piano, everything made sense. The event organizer walked closer, standing at the edge of the stage. They felt a pang of regret for not stepping in earlier when she had been dismissed. Now, watching her play, they realized how special she truly was. The warm melody continued, flowing into the empty room as though it belonged there. She didn't think about who was listening. She didn't think about the famous pianist or the hurtful moment earlier. She played because the piano felt alive under her hands, and she wanted to pour every emotion she had into the music. The event organizer approached her family quietly, whispering, "She's remarkable. She deserves better than what happened." There was a promise in their voice, something that hinted they wanted to make things right. For her, the world seemed to narrow down to just the piano, the notes, and the feelings rising inside her. She played until her hands slowed naturally, coming to a gentle stop. The final note lingered in the air before fading. She lifted her hands from the keys, holding them against her chest for a moment. A quiet smile formed on her face, filled with gratitude and peace. It wasn't the approval of others she wanted. It was this feeling, this connection with the piano she had never known before. As she stood from the bench, she didn't know that this simple moment, this soft melody played on an empty stage, was about to change everything for her. She didn't know that the people who heard her would talk about it, or that the world-famous pianist had unknowingly set the stage for something far greater than his performance. All she knew was that, for the first time in a long while, her heart felt light again. When she walked away from the piano that night, she felt a quiet calm inside her. The weight of the earlier humiliation hadn't disappeared completely, but the music had softened it. Her family guided her carefully toward the exit, whispering how proud they were. She didn't respond with big words or grand emotions. She simply held onto their hands a little tighter, grateful for their gentle support. The hall was slowly emptying out. Workers moved chairs, rolled cables across the floor, and packed equipment into cases. The air still carried the faint echo of her melody, though she didn't know it. She couldn't see the looks of surprise on the faces of the few people still lingering, but she could sense a shift, something different from the tension earlier, something warmer. Her family led her outside, stepping into the cool night air. The sky was quiet, and the faint sounds of passing vehicles filled the background. She took a deep breath, letting the crisp breeze settle around her. It wasn't the night she expected, but it had given her something she didn't even know she needed. A moment of real connection with the instrument she loved. They reached home later than usual. She didn't speak much on the way back, not because she was upset, but because the emotions inside her were too heavy to put into words. That moment at the grand piano had changed something deep in her heart. It felt like she'd touched a part of herself she didn't know existed. That night, long after everyone else had gone to sleep, she sat at her old keyboard again. She touched the keys, feeling their familiar texture. It wasn't like the grand piano at the hall. Its keys were lighter, its sound smaller, its frame worn. But the comfort was there, the soft humming she had grown up with. She played slowly, letting the memory of the grand piano guide her fingers. She didn't try to match the richness of the sound she experienced earlier. She didn't compare. She simply played because the music inside her needed a place to live. The next morning arrived quietly. Sunlight spilled across the room, though she couldn't see it. She woke to the soft sounds of morning. Birds, kitchen noise, the distant rumble of a bus. It all felt strangely peaceful. She didn't know that the small performance she gave the night before had already begun to ripple through the staff who heard it. The event organizer spoke about her to a few colleagues, telling them how surprised they were by the simple beauty of her melody. A couple of workers mentioned it while putting away equipment. Even a cleaner who stayed late went home talking about the blind girl who played the piano better than many trained musicians they'd heard. None of those conversations reached her yet. She went about her morning as she always did, unaware that the world around her had shifted in small but important ways. A few days later, the event organizer reached out to her family through a message. They politely asked if she could return to the hall for a follow-up session. Her family read the message aloud to her, unsure how she would respond. For a moment, she froze. She remembered the way the famous pianist had dismissed her. She remembered the sting in his voice. The memory made her hesitate. She didn't want to relive that discomfort. But then she remembered the piano, the weight of its keys, the way the sound filled the room, and the calm she felt while touching the instrument. With a soft nod, she agreed to go. The second visit to the hall was quieter, less crowded, and easier to manage. When she walked through the doors with her family, the energy in the space felt different. People greeted her with gentle voices, guiding her carefully. They weren't loud or intrusive. They simply offered help with kindness. The event organizer met her in person for the first time. She couldn't see the warm expression on their face, but she felt sincerity in the tone of their voice when they apologized for what had happened that day. They told her they wished they had spoken up sooner. She listened quietly, letting their words settle. After a moment, she nodded softly. She wasn't angry. She didn't hold on to bitterness. She had experienced hurt before, but she had also learned the importance of letting things go when possible. The organizer then asked if she would play again. Not for a crowd, not for a show, just for them, and for a few workers who had been moved by her music. She hesitated, unsure if she should. But her fingers twitched slightly, as if wanting to return to the keys. She agreed. They guided her back onto the stage where she had sat before. The grand piano stood there silently, waiting. She stepped toward it slowly, feeling the smooth edge under her fingertips once more. Her heart beat faster, not out of fear, but anticipation. When she sat down at the bench, the room around her grew still. Only a handful of people were present, workers, organizers, technicians. They stood quietly, eager but respectful. She couldn't see any of their faces, but she sensed their gentle attention. She placed her hands on the keys and played the same melody she had played before. Only this time she felt something new. The notes flowed smoother, her fingers more confident, her emotions clearer. The sound drifted through the hall again, filling every corner of the space. The workers paused whatever they were doing, caught once again by the simple power of her music. The organizer listened with admiration, overwhelmed by how much depth she carried in such gentle notes. When she finished, the silence in the room lasted longer than before. Not because people were confused, because they were moved. The quiet felt heavy, meaningful. Then soft clapping filled the air. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was warm, genuine. The organizer stepped closer and asked a question that would reshape everything. "Would you be willing to play something at an upcoming event?" They asked softly. "You don't have to perform in front of a huge crowd. But your music, it deserves to be heard." She sat in silence for a moment. She had never imagined performing publicly. She loved playing in the privacy of her home or empty spaces. The idea of being watched, judged, or compared frightened her. But something inside her whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was a door she shouldn't close. She asked quietly if she would need to play something complicated. The organizer shook their head even though she couldn't see it. "Play anything your heart feels," they said. "People don't always need big performances. Sometimes, simple truth touches deeper." Her family stood nearby, waiting for her decision. They didn't push her or encourage her too strongly. They wanted it to come from her. After a long breath, she gave a small nod. The organizer smiled. Plans were not made on that day, but a promise settled in the space between them. A promise that she would return, not as someone dismissed or overlooked, but as someone valued. In the days that followed, she practiced more than usual. Her old keyboard carried the burden of her determination. She played the same melody again and again, but each time she poured more emotion into it. Not because she wanted perfection, but because she wanted honesty. Changed. She didn't know it yet, but the upcoming performance would be the moment that changed everything, the moment the world would go silent to listen. For now, she simply kept practicing, letting the notes guide her toward a future she could not see, but could finally feel approaching. In the dim light of early morning, she sat on the narrow balcony outside her small room, listening to the soft hum of the city waking up. The air was cool, carrying distant traffic and the quiet rustle of leaves. For a moment, she let the fresh breeze settle her thoughts. The events from the day before kept circling in her mind. The rushed rehearsal, the harsh comment from the world-famous pianist, the uneasy silence of the room as she stood there trying not to tremble. She had gone home holding those words like a heavy stone pressed against her chest, and even after a night's rest, they still stung. But today, she told herself, had to be different. She couldn't allow one voice, no matter how important the world thought he was, to define her. She reached for the small keyboard resting beside her chair. It wasn't fancy and several keys squeaked, but it was hers. She let her fingers glide lightly over the surface, memorizing the familiar shape of each key. Even though she couldn't see them, her hands knew every inch of this instrument like an old friend. She closed her eyes, not that it made any difference, and played a slow, warm melody. It wasn't from any book or lesson. It came from a place inside her that she trusted even when she doubted everything else. The notes floated softly into the morning, wrapping around her like a gentle promise. Every time she played, she felt herself come back into shape, as though the world's harsh edges softened for a moment. After a few minutes, she stopped and took a deep breath. She had only one thought. She would not give up. If he could dismiss her in a room full of people, she could still answer with music, even if no one else believed in her yet. Her mother's footsteps approached from inside the house. She could hear the familiar rhythm of her walk, the slight pause between each step that she could recognize anywhere. "Are you awake this early again?" her mother asked gently. "I couldn't sleep long," she answered with a small smile. "I heard you playing. It sounded peaceful." Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder. "Don't let yesterday sit too long in your heart." She nodded, though her throat tightened. "I'm trying. You're stronger than you think," her mother whispered, giving her shoulder a squeeze. The rest of the morning passed quietly. She showered, dressed, tied her hair back with a simple ribbon, and double-checked that she had everything she needed before leaving. Today she had another session at the music center, a place that always felt both comforting and intimidating. The entrance smelled faintly of wood polish and old sheet music, and the corridors echoed with practice sounds from different rooms. When she arrived, she could sense the mood of the building immediately. There was a nervous energy in the air. People spoke in hushed tones, and she could hear the rustling of programs being handed out. Something felt different. A soft voice greeted her near the reception desk. "You're here early." It was one of the assistants. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "There's a lot of preparation today," the assistant replied. "The famous pianist will be holding another masterclass. Many students are excited or terrified." She laughed lightly. Her stomach tightened. She didn't expect to face him again so soon. "Don't worry," the assistant added, sensing her silence. "You don't have to go anywhere near that hall if you're not comfortable." She nodded, appreciating the kindness, even though deep inside she knew that hiding wouldn't help her move forward. She made her way to the small practice room assigned to her. It smelled faintly of old fabric and warmed-up air from the heater. She placed her bag on the chair, ran her fingers across the piano lid, and slowly lifted it. The keys were cool under her fingertips, smoother than the ones at home. She sat still for a moment, grounding herself. Then she began to play. This time the melody wasn't calm. It was full of energy, full of unanswered questions, of frustration, of something burning quietly beneath her ribs. Her hands moved faster than usual, as if trying to spill out everything she had been holding back. She didn't realize how long she'd been playing until she heard a soft knock on the door. She stopped mid-phrase. "Yes?" she said, turning her head slightly. The door creaked open. It was one of her classmates. A kind boy she knew mostly from the sound of his shoes, and the way he always cleared his throat nervously before speaking. I'm sorry to interrupt," he said. "I just came to say, that was amazing." I could hear it from the hallway. She felt her face warm. "Thank you," she whispered. "Are you joining the masterclass today?" he asked. She hesitated. "I don't know." "You should," he said quickly, as if afraid she would say no again. "I know yesterday wasn't fair, but everyone in that room knows you have something special, even if he didn't see it." She let the silence sit for a moment. Then she said, "I'll think about it." When he left, she sat quietly again, listening to the soft hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. She knew she couldn't avoid what happened forever. She could either stay in this room and let yesterday define her, or she could walk into that hall and show that she deserved to be there just as much as anyone else. The decision settled in her chest, not heavy, but steady. She stood up. The walk to the masterclass hall felt longer than usual. She followed the familiar pattern of steps, counting them in her mind, brushing her fingers against the wall when she needed orientation. When she reached the hallway outside the hall, she could hear chatter from inside. Nervous whispers, excited breaths, the restless shifting of chairs. She took a slow breath and stepped inside. The room felt quieter than she expected. She didn't know people were looking at her, but she could sense the sudden stillness. Footsteps approached, calm, confident, practiced. She knew instantly who it was. The world-famous pianist stopped a few steps in front of her. His voice held the same sharpness as yesterday, but there was something new beneath it, curiosity or maybe surprise. "You came back," he said. She lifted her chin slightly. "Yes." There was a pause long enough to feel like a question. Then he said, "Take a seat. You can watch if you want." She didn't move. "I didn't come to watch." The silence that followed stretched across the entire hall. Chairs creaked lightly as people shifted to look at her. The pianist spoke again, this time with a slight huff of disbelief. "You want to play?" "Yes," she said softly but clearly. Another pause, longer this time. Then he stepped aside. "Very well." Someone guided her to the bench. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the keys. The piano felt different from the one in her practice room, richer, heavier in its presence. For a moment, fear sat in her throat. But then she remembered the morning breeze, her mother's gentle words, the boy at the door, and the melody that had poured out of her earlier. She placed her hands on the keys, and she began to play. The hall grew still, not just quiet, but completely silent. It was the kind of silence that only comes when every single person is holding their breath. She played not to prove anything, not to defend herself, but because the music inside her needed to be heard. It rose and fell like a story, carrying all the moments she had lived through, all the ones she had endured. Her fingers moved with certainty, guided not by sight but by trust. When the last note faded, the silence stretched even further. She didn't know what anyone's face looked like, but she knew the room had. The applause slowly faded, but the feeling it left behind stayed in the air like something warm and bright. The girl sat quietly, not really sure how to react to so many people looking at her with surprise and respect. She had never expected anything like this. She had come to the event just to listen, maybe to learn something new, and instead she had ended up touching the grand piano and playing from her heart in front of a room full of strangers. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She just wanted to feel the piano once in her life. But what happened after that moment felt bigger than anything she could have imagined. She kept her hands resting gently on the keys, almost afraid to move. She wasn't sure where to look, so she just sat still, letting the sounds around her guide her feelings. People were whispering softly, some saying they couldn't believe how beautifully she played, others saying they had never heard a melody that felt so honest. Even without seeing their faces, she could tell their voices carried emotion. She felt a strange mix of peace and nervousness, like she had done something she didn't fully understand yet. Then she heard footsteps approaching. Slow, steady, almost hesitant. The crowd grew quiet again. She didn't know who was walking toward her until she heard a familiar voice. It was the world-famous pianist, the one who had dismissed her earlier without giving her a chance. His voice didn't sound proud or confident anymore. It sounded softer, almost unsure. He stopped in front of her, and the room seemed to wait for whatever was going to happen next. She lifted her head slightly, not able to see him, but able to feel the presence of someone standing very close. He took a breath before speaking. His words came out carefully, as if he wanted to make sure she heard every part of them. He apologized. Not just a small apology, but a real, full one. He told her he had spoken too quickly, judged too fast, and acted with the kind of pride that sometimes blinds even someone who can see. He said he had forgotten that music wasn't about fame or titles, but about connection, feeling, and soul. And she had reminded him of that. The girl didn't know what to say at first. She didn't expect him to say sorry in front of everyone. She didn't expect his voice to sound so humble. She listened quietly, letting his words sink in. She wasn't angry anymore, not even hurt. All she had wanted when she arrived was to feel a real piano. She never thought she would teach someone a lesson just by playing what she felt. She told him calmly that she had not been looking for attention. She had just wanted to touch the piano because she loved music and wanted to feel what it was like to play on something so grand. She explained that she wasn't upset with him, not really. She was used to people judging her too quickly, but she didn't let that stop her from trying. Her voice stayed gentle, even though the moment carried so much weight. Her words made the people around her quiet again. It wasn't the kind of silence that felt awkward. It was the kind that came when people realized they had witnessed something meaningful. The pianist listened closely, and when she finished speaking, he told her that her courage had taught him more than any concert or award ever had. He thanked her, and the sincerity in his voice was clear. The crowd slowly began to clap again, but this time it wasn't for a performance. It was for the moment between the two of them, simple, honest, and human. The girl felt her shoulders relax, sensing that the tension in the room had eased. She felt warmth in the applause, not the kind that demanded her attention, but the kind that respected her. After a moment, someone gently guided her away from the piano so the next part of the event could continue. People came up to her one by one, speaking softly, telling her how much her music meant to them. Some said her playing reminded them of something they had forgotten. Others said they felt like they had heard a story without words. She listened quietly, unsure how to respond to such big compliments, but grateful for every single one. The event organizers approached her with kindness. They told her that her performance had been recorded and people were already talking about it online. She didn't fully understand how quickly news could spread, but she felt a flutter of nerves hearing that strangers were watching her play. Still, she trusted that if the music was honest, it would reach people in the right way. Later, the pianist returned to speak with her privately. His voice was much calmer, almost gentle. He told her he wanted to make things right, not because he felt guilty, but because he recognized her talent and believed others needed to see it too. He asked if she would be willing to perform a small piece at his next concert. The idea felt overwhelming. She wasn't used to standing in front of large audiences. She wasn't sure she was ready. She took a moment before answering. She told him she needed time to think about it. She didn't want to make a decision just because someone famous was asking her. She wanted to choose in her own time with her own heart. He respected that completely, promising her there would be no pressure. As the evening went on, she sat quietly with her family, processing everything that had happened. They held her hands tightly, proud of her for staying strong, proud of her for playing with courage even after being rejected. They told her that no matter what she chose next, they were already proud. She thought about the moment she first touched the piano earlier that day. She thought about how she had felt the smooth keys under her fingers, how she had let the music flow without worrying about who was listening. That feeling mattered more than anything. It reminded her why she loved music in the first place. Before they left the event, she walked past the stage one more time. She touched the edge of the piano gently, almost like saying goodbye to the moment that had changed everything. She knew her life had shifted in some way, even if she didn't yet know where it would lead. People still whispered around her, some asking who she was, others telling each other they would never forget what they heard. She didn't try to listen closely. She didn't need praise to feel whole. All she needed was the memory of the music she had played and the peace it brought her. But deep inside, she also felt the spark of something new, an invitation, a possibility, something she never thought she would get. And even though she told the pianist she needed time to think, she knew her heart was already moving toward a decision. She didn't want applause. She didn't want fame. She wanted something simpler. She wanted to share the one thing she had always trusted, her music. And that thought stayed with her long after the lights dimmed and the crowd went home. When she woke up the next morning, the world felt strangely calm. It was the kind of calm that follows a long night of thinking, the kind that sits quietly inside the heart. She had barely slept, not because she was troubled, but because her mind kept replaying the events of the evening before. Every sound, every whispered compliment, every moment she spent at the piano seemed to float around her like gentle echoes. Her family moved softly around the house that morning. They didn't want to overwhelm her with questions. They didn't want to push her into talking before she was ready. They simply stayed close, giving her the space to find her thoughts. She sat by her keyboard, her fingers lightly touching the keys. She wasn't playing yet. She was just remembering the weight of the grand piano, the feel of each note, the way the room turned silent as she played. That silence had felt different than the silence she lived in every day. It wasn't empty or lonely. It was full of attention, full of meaning. A knock at the door broke the quiet. Her family answered it, and she listened from her seat. She recognized the voice right away. It was the event organizer. Their tone was warm, careful, almost excited. They asked if they could speak with her for a moment. She walked slowly to the living room, guided gently by her family. When she reached the sofa, she sat down and listened as the organizer explained why they had come. Overnight, her short performance had spread far beyond the concert hall. People were talking about her online, sharing the video with friends, saying her music touched them in ways they couldn't explain. The organizer didn't rush through their words. They wanted her to understand how deeply her music had reached people. They told her that radio stations were already asking about her. Small music groups wanted to feature her, and even the pianist who had apologized wanted to arrange something meaningful with her. She listened quietly, her fingers tapping lightly against her leg. Fame wasn't something she had ever imagined. She had grown up believing that music was her personal world, something that belonged only to her and the walls of her home. Now it felt like that world was opening up in front of her. The organizer then shared something even more surprising. A foundation that supported young musicians with disabilities wanted to offer her a scholarship to receive lessons from some of the best teachers in the country. They believed she had something special, something that couldn't be taught but could be guided. Her heart raced a little. Lessons? Real lessons? She had learned everything she knew by listening, feeling, and trusting the world inside her mind. The idea of being formally trained felt both exciting and frightening. She asked for time to think. Not because she didn't want the opportunity, but because she didn't want to make decisions in excitement alone. She needed to feel it fully, deeply. The organizer respected her choice and promised to return whenever she was ready. After they left, her family sat with her, speaking softly about everything that had happened. They didn't tell her what she should do. They didn't try to guide her in any direction. They simply reminded her that they believed in her, no matter what path she chose. For the rest of the day, she practiced quietly. Not the melody she had played at the grand piano, but new ones. Soft ones, steady ones, ones that helped her think. Music had always guided her, and now she needed it more than ever. That night, she lay awake again. She thought about the pianist who had once dismissed her. She thought about how quickly things had changed. Not long ago, she had been just a girl sitting in the background of a crowded event, unnoticed, unheard. And now, the same people who overlooked her were telling her she had moved them. She thought about performing again. The idea scared her a little. Crowds made her nervous. The weight of so many eyes, even ones she couldn't see, felt overwhelming. But there was another feeling too. A small, bright feeling. A feeling that whispered that perhaps this was what she was meant to do. The next morning, she made her decision. Her family sat with her as she sent a message to the organizer, her hands trembling slightly. She told them she wanted to accept the scholarship. She wanted to learn, to grow, to see where her music could take her. And she also agreed to perform one more time at the pianist's upcoming event. Not because he was famous, but because she wanted to share her music again. The organizer responded immediately, almost as if they had been waiting. They told her they were honored by her decision and would arrange everything. The following weeks passed with a comforting rhythm. She practiced daily, not pushing herself but taking steady steps. She learned new techniques through voice notes, audio lessons, and in-person guidance. Her teachers were amazed by how naturally she understood rhythm and emotion. They said it was something rare, something that couldn't be taught. Her confidence grew slowly but surely. As the day of the performance approached, she felt the nervousness return. But this time it didn't overwhelm her. It felt like a companion, a reminder that she was stepping into something meaningful. The concert hall was larger than the one she had visited before. She could feel it in the air, the vastness of the space, the hum of the crowd, the low murmur of people settling into their seats. She stood backstage with her family beside her, listening to the sounds of the event starting. When the pianist walked in to greet her, his voice held genuine respect. He thanked her again for accepting the invitation. He told her that the moment she touched the keys weeks ago had changed him. It had reminded him why he became a pianist in the first place. Then the time came. She walked onto the stage slowly, guided gently by the staff. The crowd grew quiet, the silence settling softly across the room. She sat at the grand piano, feeling once again the familiar weight of the keys beneath her fingertips. But this time she wasn't unsure. She wasn't nervous about being judged. She knew why she was here. She took a deep breath, and then she played. The melody she chose wasn't complicated. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was gentle, warm, full of emotion, just like her. Each note felt like a word she couldn't speak. Each chord felt like a piece of her heart she was offering to the room. The audience listened in complete stillness. Not a cough, not a whisper, not a rustle. It was as if the world had stopped just to hear her. When she finished, the silence lingered, deep, heavy, beautiful. Then the applause came. It rose slowly at first, then louder, stronger, filling the hall with a sound so overwhelming she felt it vibrate through her chest. She couldn't see the standing crowd, but she felt their emotion like a wave. She smiled softly. In that moment, she knew her life had changed forever. Not because she had become famous, but because she had finally shared her true self with the world. And the world, for once, had gone quiet just to listen.